Today, let's go over 7 powerful storytelling secrets to improve your communication skills. So, firstly, is playing the characters. So, instead of just saying what happened, use dialogue instead. So, for example, like he said and then I said, because it adds another level of engagement to make the audience more invested. And when you play a scene, you can also make different voices for the different characters too, and it adds color. So, for example, if you're talking about an argument that you had, and instead of just saying, "Yeah, we argued," and he just said that he just says I don't really listen to him. But then instead of that, you can say, so like I had an argument and he said, "What is wrong with you? Why do you never listen to me?" And I said, "I do listen, but you're just twisting my words." And then that just makes the scene more vivid and the audience more engaged because it's like your actual words. And secondly is link story to a point. So basically, the story has to have like a purpose and a clear point and message at the end. So there has to be a reason to why you're telling the story in the first place. So when you tell the story, think about what it symbolizes or what feelings appeared in it. And it basically, because once you like tell an audience a story first before you try to help them, first you engage them with the story, and that builds a connection, and you can link it to the audiences like where they are at right now and their problems too, and like make it relatable to them, and then tell them how you're going to help them. And this ensures that you have connection and depth before you try to help. So for example, if you're trying to help a friend to like continue and not quit a project, you could tell a story of when you were in a similar experience. When you were in a project, you could be like, "Oh yeah, I had this project due and I had loads of work and everybody was like doubting me and I was doubting myself too, but in the end I still managed to go through and like think of it in a new perspective, and in the end it ended up being one of the proudest projects I've ever done." And the message of this story could be, even if you doubt yourself, even like if you push through, you might still be able to like reach your goal, and you shouldn't like quit straight away. So this would obviously help the friend more because it showed that you were once in a similar situation before you tried to help them. Thirdly is specificity. So basically, if you're more like specific, if you add like more detail and describe it, the story comes to life and makes it more engaging. It paints a vivid picture in the audience's mind and they can absorb the story much better. And it also makes it more believable and interesting as well. So it makes the person or the character that you're talking about come to life. And being specific brings your story to life, but the dialogue, as I said before, it adds color to it as well. So an example of this is maybe like you're in school and like you're telling a story about like a really strict teacher that came. Instead of just saying, "Oh, it was a strict teacher," you could say, he had like white hair and it was quite short, and he always had like fur on his brow and an angry expression, and whenever he would speak it would be really loud and like harsh, and that paints the picture of it like much better than if you just said he was strict. And instead of saying like "I was nervous," for example, if you came to like collect your homework, then just say like "I could feel my hands shaking and my heart pounding" instead, which really adds more detail to it and brings it to life. Fourth is a peak moment. So there was this quote from this like director that a movie is just life without the boring bits, which is also a really good indicator for how stories should be great, because whenever you tell a story, you tell it around like a peak emotional moment or like a peak like action. And you can like convey this better by having drama or like using delivery mechanisms in your voice, for example like raising it sometimes or like lowering it, and just like using different tones, and this can really highlight the moment. And it's like, for example, if you're just telling a story and it's about like when you're at work or something, like you might not want to say, "Oh, in the morning I woke up, I brushed my teeth, then I changed my clothes and I went downstairs to eat breakfast," because that like, although like some things you might have like say it like have a little boring bit like for context, because it always builds up to the emotional moment, for that bit it doesn't really have, it wouldn't really add anything to the like actual like peak moment. So, and it doesn't really add any purpose or like value to the story. So in that scenario, it would probably just be better to cut it out to keep the audience more engaged. Fifth is to use the word imagine, because it invites the audience to actively participate in like your story, and it just doesn't, it means that they can't just like zone out and tune the story out, and it means they can create more like mental pictures and even like construct their own world and like engage their emotions. So yeah, because they'll be able to connect more to the character in your story, so they'll have more empathy and connection for them because they'll imagine themselves in the person's shoes instead, and it also deepens their understanding. So for example, if you were talking to like a group of people like about the topic of how to overcome fear, for example, instead of just like talking about a scenario, you could like you could ask the audience to imagine like a scenario, like for example, like imagine you're standing on the stage in the school theatre and everyone is looking at you, and the really big and bright spotlight is shining on you, and like your hands are shaking, and so all of a sudden you forget all of your notes. That just like adds a lot more, and it makes the audience engage with it a lot more because they're imagining themselves in that scenario and how they would feel as well. Sixth is report versus relive. So when you act out a story, you start to relive part of the story too, and it takes you back to the moment. And when you're like reliving a story, you often speak in the present tense and include lots of like sensory experiences and emotions. However, many people often like report their story instead, and they just list the historical events that happened. They'll use minimal detail and like just like speak in the past tense and just focus on the facts that happened instead of any other detail. And if you like relive your story for the audience, then when you feel something that you felt in the moment again, because you're like transported back, they will feel it as well. And yeah, basically just give yourself permission to just start and keep going. So an example of this could be like if you're telling a story about how you almost dropped your phone when you're on a bridge. By reporting the story, it would be, yesterday I was on a bridge and my phone almost dropped, but luckily I caught it. But if you were reliving the moment, you would say, the bridge is swaying beneath my feet, and I'm just mindlessly scrolling on my phone when suddenly I feel it slip out of my hands. I see the silver phone case tumble through the air and I try to catch it, and luckily I feel it in between my fingers. And that's also in the present tense, so it's like you're actually there, and it also lets the audience feel how panicked you were as well when it was like turning in the air. Seventh is the lesson. So always like set the focus of your story and like where the lesson is learned, and you can like tell your story just around the lesson or the emotional or action or the action moment. So an example of this would be if you're telling like a story about a person who's very kind-hearted and really likes helping people, but then you start using an example of like when he was 11, he really wanted to be like an astronaut, and so he would go to the library every day to get loads of books and would always spend lots of his free time like studying so he could achieve it. Then that shows his commitment to studying instead of his like being kind-hearted and like willing to help. But however, this means that you need to think about another example in his life and like childhood, or just in his life in general, that actually supports your point. For example, when he was 13, his friend broke his leg, and he was like unable to come to school. So every single day after school, he would bring lots of snacks and like notes from the lesson to his friend and help him catch up on the school life, and also about any notes and lessons that he missed from the teacher. And this shows that he was willing to go out of his way to actually help his friend, even though he wasn't really like obligated to, he still helped him. So this shows how he was kind-hearted and willing to help, and really sets the focus on the character that you want to talk about. So in conclusion, I think these are like all really important points, but mostly I think to be really specific and to add lots of detail to your story, so that it actually makes it come to life instead of just being like a boring like 2D thing on the page. And also to like always relive the moment instead of just reporting it, because then you actually bring the audience into your own world. And just like finally, to always have like a point and also a focus in your story, so you have a reason to tell the story and you're always focusing on it and you don't stray outside of the path. So thank you for listening. Bye.